Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, where we discuss all the news in the world of basketball, top games, college, NBA, high school. Everything is covered here at the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Back here on another fabulous Friday. Really interested and really excited for this show today. We're talking a lot of playoff basketball. I mean, it's really all there is left to be said. Really great games. We got some big storylines. Games from last night. We got games to preview and look at tonight. It's going to be a very exciting time here at the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. As always, my name is Ben Brown. We are here, and last night we had 3 playoff games on the schedule. Tonight we have 3 more. Some very important game 3s between Boston and Chicago, Houston and Oklahoma City, and the Clippers and the Jazz, as well as we had game 3s last night between the Cavaliers and Pacers, the Raptors and the Bucks, and the Spurs and the Grizzlies. So you know what, guys? We're not going to waste any time. We're going to get right into looking at what happened last night. We'll go in order of how these games appeared. All 3 of them really good storylines to take away from the games from last night. So, I mean, first of all, let's start right off with the Cavaliers and the Pacers. This is Game 3. Cavs already up 2-0. First couple of games got out to some big leads, kind of gave them away in the fourth quarter. They won the games, obviously, but not really convincing. So what could they do on the road in Indiana? Well, the Cavs win 119-114 behind a monstrous second half from LeBron James. The Pacers blow a 25-point halftime lead and lose by 5 against Cleveland. Jeez, man. I was watching this game yesterday, and it was literally a tale of 2 halves. The first half, Indiana were all over them. They score a franchise postseason record 74 points in the first half, which honestly is pretty incredible. I mean, I was watching the game, and I'm like, well, like typical Cleveland. Like, they're still not that postseason team that looks ready to me. I mean, their defense is still very poor. Paul George absolutely lit them up in the second quarter, especially. He had 19 points in the second quarter alone. Ended up finishing with 36 and 15 rebounds and 9 assists. Played pretty well, but that second quarter, Paul George lit them up. Their defense just couldn't really stop anybody. But you know what? It's almost like whatever LeBron James or Ty Lue, somebody said it in the locker room at halftime, just kind of woke up like a sleeping giant almost, because in the second half they scored 70 points. Their defense played a lot better. They only gave up 40 points in that second half, and they won by 5, and it was literally the LeBron James show. Another triple-double for LeBron, 41 points, 13 rebounds, 12 assists, couple of blocks, and 1 steal. But in the second half particular, LeBron absolutely tore up the Indiana Pacers. 28 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists, 0 turnovers, and a plus or minus of 30 in the second half. Once again, proving how good of a player he is. In the fourth quarter alone, Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love didn't even see the floor. It was the LeBron James show. In the third quarter, they cut it down to 7 going into the fourth, and in the fourth, just absolutely steamrolled them. For Indiana to let this game get away is just absolutely horrendous. This is a game they absolutely needed to win. They're now down 3-0. I said I would have given Indiana one game in this series. It should have been last night. Looking at Game 4, I really don't see any way the Pacers can win that game, just given the emotional letdown of Game 3 here. Absolutely horrible. I mean, this series is over, and the Paul George era in Indiana is going to be over. He's still got another year on his contract. Who knows? Potentially he could want to request a trade. He really, really wants to go out west to the Lakers. Larry Bird's not an idiot. He's a pretty smart guy. He knows that Paul George is not going to stick around long term. They've got to do something. He's definitely unhappy. Called out C.J. Miles after Game 1. Called out Lance Stevenson after Game 2. Paul George is just definitely on his way out. And last night didn't help the case at all. So you're looking at Game 4 now. That's going to be on Sunday between the Cavs and Pacers. And I really don't see any way the Pacers can win this game. As far as Cleveland is concerned, I'm not going to say they're completely like, oh my God, they're ready to defend their title and they're in top form. Last night definitely helped, though. I mean, the comeback and the momentum going into Game 4 because of that second half is really, really big. And I think you have to say, hey, tip of your cap a little bit because you pulled off the greatest one of the greatest comebacks in postseason history, tied a record for the most points coming back there with 25 at halftime, 26 in total. So you kind of have to say, wow, maybe they're starting to maybe turn the page a little bit, and we'll have to see what happens in Game 4. But Indiana, for me, is just completely done, and you can't let that happen. A 25-point halftime lead at home, you can't let that get away from you. But LeBron James creating magic yet again. Elsewhere in the NBA, we're sticking in the Eastern Conference. We had Game 3 between the Toronto Raptors and the Milwaukee Bucks. Series tied 1-1 after Milwaukee won Game 1, and then Toronto edged out Game 2. So Game 3, we go over to Milwaukee, who's the 6th seed. And quite honestly, from start to finish, they just absolutely blew out the Toronto Raptors 104-77. Milwaukee was up by 20 already at the end of the first quarter. Absolutely dominating game from really everybody on Milwaukee, in particular their defense. DeMar DeRozan shot 0 of 8 from the entire floor. He didn't even make a field goal. He had 8 points, all of them coming from the free throw line. Kyle Lowry, 13 points, 4 of 10 shooting. As a team, Toronto only shot 33.8%. Really, really balanced from Milwaukee. A lot of players in double figures. You had 6 in total. You had 19 from Giannis Antetokounmpo with 8 rebounds and 4 assists. Thon Maker had 11 points, the big man there. A really, really good game from Milwaukee. I feel like they really match up well with Toronto, given their size and length. You have guys you can bring off the bench like Greg Monroe, Michael Beasley, Spencer Hawes. I mean, to go along with the length of Antetokounmpo and Malcolm Brogdon and Thon Maker. They're really, really long and athletic, are Milwaukee. And they're playing really well. You know what I mean? They're really, really competing with Toronto. The Raptors, their backcourt in particular, has really, really struggled. We know Kyle Lowry really struggled in the postseason last year, and he's doing it again this year. DeRozan really getting locked down in due part by Tony Snell because of his high-pressure defense. I mean, Milwaukee, basketball is a game of matchups, and that's where I'll sort of take it into the next segment when we look at the games tonight and update you on some of the playoff series so far. But basketball is a game of matchups, and Milwaukee is not the greatest team. They're young, they're athletic, they're fun to watch, but they match up really, really well with Toronto. Serge Ibaka, he wants to be more of a mid-range shooter. He's not a guy who plays with his back to the basket. Well, I mean, when you're looking at maybe a potential of like a Thon Maker or Antetokounmpo guarding you, I mean, that's a little tough. Or even a guy off the bench like Greg Monroe with his size and length, or Michael Beasley. It's a little tough because they play that same sort of style. And then you have DeRozan getting matched up against Tony Snell. And then you have a guy like Matthew Dellavedova you can bring off the bench to play 28 minutes to guard Kyle Lowry, who gets in his face and is really aggressive. So you got to give the Bucks a lot of credit. It's that really the Antetokounmpo show as far as offense is concerned, but they're really playing as a whole defensively, and they just match up really, really well with Toronto. I'll still give the Raptors the edge in the series. You got to imagine that Lowry and DeRozan are going to turn it around a little bit, But Game 4 is an absolute must-win. Game 4 is going to be tomorrow on Saturday. That's an absolute must-win because if you're going down 3-1, the Bucks have already proven that they can beat you in Toronto. So Game 5 could be facing elimination. That's definitely a tough thing to overcome. It's a must-win in Game 4. I got to think the Raptors will get it done. They're still a great team, and they still are a better team than Milwaukee, but they just really aren't playing well in the postseason so far, even going back to last year. And they need to turn it around. They need to get their act together because the Bucks are here to play. They're coming in, and they are red hot right now. So they need to get their act together, and they need to get to that win in Game 4. And lastly, you do have the Spurs and the Grizzlies. Take that for data. David Fizdale's post-game rant in Game 2 about the officiating, that was classic. But the Grizzlies in Game 3 go back home to the FedEx Forum, and they actually win in Game 3, 105-94, 11-point victory there. Good game from Mike Conley, 24 points and 8 assists. The big man combination of Zach Randolph and Marc Gasol each have 21 points in the victory there. Wayne Selden off the bench chipped in with 10. Really, really good performance from Memphis. Shot really well. Shot 50.6%, 41% from 3. Spurs, didn't really play terrible. Didn't really get great contributions from their stars. Kawhi Leonard only 18 points. LaMarcus Aldridge only 16 points. Kyle Anderson off the bench really played well. 6 of 7, 15 points. Took along with 3 assists and a couple of rebounds. The Spurs are still in a very, very good situation. Game 4 is going to be tomorrow. It's a must-win for Memphis. If they go down 3-1, the series is over. I feel like the Spurs, they got it under wraps. I'd say at worst 6 games. Probably at best Game 5 if they win tomorrow. Going back to San Antonio in Game 5, they should be able to get that done. But one game. I'll give Memphis one game. Went back to home. That's definitely where you can get it done. Spurs are still a great team. They did not play well last night. Really struggled. 12 turnovers. So they'll be just fine. Memphis is a good balanced team. They only committed the ball over 5 times. That's really, really good. And I'm not really worried about the San Antonio Spurs. We'll talk about what's upcoming tonight. Got 3 very big Game 3s. We'll break it down, what teams need to happen, what my predictions are. Got some games for the weekend as well. All that upcoming here at the GSMC Basketball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back into the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. We'll talk about upcoming games for tonight, tomorrow, and Sunday. We'll break down these games tonight in particular because, of course, for the games upcoming, we're not going to sure how the series is going to be set up, given the fact that there are teams playing tonight. But let's talk about Game 3, the Celtics and the Bulls. The Bulls, of course, up 2-0 over the Celtics, blowing them out in Game 2. Isaiah Thomas is going to be playing in this game tonight. He was not with the team yesterday nor Wednesday because he was back in his hometown of Tacoma, Washington, dealing with the death of his sister China. You remember she did die in a single-car accident last weekend. Very, very unfortunate for Thomas. He's going to be playing tonight. He was back with his team, although he did not practice nor travel with them the last couple of days. So I feel like that will definitely make a little bit of an impact, given the fact that he wasn't at practice, wasn't catching up to what the Celtics were trying to operate against and the adjustments they're trying to make. Because the Bulls have played really, really well against the Celtics, but it does get a little worse for the Bulls. It's very unfortunate, but Rajon Rondo, he's going to be out indefinitely with a thumb fracture that he suffered in Game 2. He's not going to need surgery, but he's out indefinitely, definitely out for tonight as well. That's a big, big loss for Chicago. Rondo's played fantastic through 2 games, and in particular, his size and length on defense guarding Isaiah Thomas. Thomas has played well, but remember, he's only 5 foot, 7, 8, 9, depending on where he's actually listed and what he's actually measured at. He's a little guy, Rondo's big, athletic, got some really, really big hands. He's playing great defense on Thomas, but without him there, that's a big loss for Chicago. And the ability he has as a passer and as a rebounder. Still have Jimmy Butler, who is by far the best player in this series. Robin Lopez has played really, really well matching up against Al Horford. He's actually dominated him through a couple of games. Dwayne Wade's got the experience. He's a 3-time NBA champion and a future Hall of Famer. I got to think that the Celtics win tonight. I think the loss of Rondo is big, not just for tonight, but for the whole series. And the Celtics, they're just too good of a team to really lose 3 in a row to Chicago, get swept, lose the series. I still like the Celtics in this series, honestly, especially with Rondo being out now. But tonight's a must-win. They go down 3-0. There's no way that they're going to come back and win the series. It has never happened in basketball. It happens in NHL almost all the time, and it's happened in baseball one time with the Red Sox and Yankees. But I got to think they get it done tonight. It's a must-win. I got to think the Celtics really, really rally and win tonight. You're looking at a couple other games here in the Western Conference. You have the Oklahoma City Thunder at the Chesapeake Energy Arena hosting the Houston Rockets. This is a must-win for the Thunder as well. They're down 0-2, but maybe they win tonight, but Game 4, I definitely see Houston winning. Houston should win in 5, really. I thought the Thunder would compete. I thought they'd have a chance in the series, but there's just simply no one around Russell Westbrook. Game 2, he had a 51-point triple-double, took 43 shots. I mean, that goes to show you that he just cannot trust anybody around him, whether it's Oladipo, Steven Adams, Enes Kanter, even guys like Taj Gibson or Doug McDermott off the bench. He just simply cannot trust anybody around him to do anything with the ball in their hands except pass it right back to him. I think the Rockets definitely get it done in 5. Maybe the Thunder win tonight. It's going to take another Herculean effort from Westbrook to even keep it close in my eyes. The crowd's going to be rocking at the Chesapeake Energy Arena. As I mentioned, it's almost like a college town there in Oklahoma City. So I think they maybe win tonight but lose Game 4. Rockets are just a simply better team than the Thunder. There's nobody around Westbrook, and it's very, very clear through 2 games in this series so far that he just simply doesn't have any help, and it's just not a good situation for the Thunder. And then you have Game 3 tonight as well. You have in Utah, the Jazz and the Los Angeles Clippers will meet up. This series is tied at 1-1. The Jazz did win Game 1, and then the Clippers bounce back and win Game 2 by 8. I think the Clippers will win tonight. The Jazz still without big man Rudy Gobert. He is out with a hyperextension in his left knee. He's still optimistic about returning later in the series, but it's not going to be tonight here in Game 3, and that's a big loss. They basically have missed him for both games of the series because you will remember in Game 1, he only played 11 seconds before he was forced to leave the game. So I don't really count that much. But I'll take the Clippers. I mean, the Jazz, Rudy Gobert is a big part of their team, not just what he does offensively, but defense in particular. His length inside at 7'2", his ability to block shots and rebound. I'll give the edge to the Clippers. I think the Jazz will definitely make it a good series. I see this going maybe 6 games, but I think the Clippers will still get it done. And tonight at the Vivint Smart Home Arena in Salt Lake City, Utah. You look ahead to games on Saturday. We have a lot of playoff games. 4 in particular. We have Game 4 between the Raptors and the Bucks. It's a must-win for Toronto, as I mentioned in the last segment. We also have Game 3 of the 4-5 matchup in the East. That's the Wizards and the Hawks. Wizards have a 2-0 lead currently. John Wall's played fantastic against Dennis Schroeder in that point guard position battle. The Hawks will probably win Game 3 at the Phillips Arena in Atlanta, but they do have trouble selling out their arena there. People simply don't even show up to even playoff games, And the Wizards, with their backcourt, are very, very tough. John Wall has been lighting up Dennis Schroeder, as I mentioned. It's a must-win for Atlanta. They can't afford to go down 3-0, so I'll give them Game 3. But I still like the Wizards to advance through against the Atlanta Hawks. We have Game 4 between the Spurs and the Grizzlies. Of course, the Spurs have a 2-1 lead in this series. I will give Game 4 to San Antonio, the number 2 seed in the Western Conference. I feel like they will be able to roll past Memphis. Memphis in maybe 5 or 6 games it'll take, but the Spurs are just simply a better team, just too much balance and too much greatness in that team, whether it's Popovich or Kawhi Leonard, LaMarcus Aldridge, Tony Parker. Just the legacy of San Antonio is definitely going to roll by the Grizzlies. And then we have Game 3 between the top seed Golden State Warriors and the Portland Trail Blazers. It looks like Kevin Durant is probably going to play in Game 3. He does have that sprained calf, so he's dealing with a little bit of a nagging injury. Remember, they held him out of Game 2, and I mean, they didn't even need him. They rolled right past the Blazers and blew him out in Game 2. Not to mention, they also rested on Matt Barnes. They also rested Sean Livingston. So they rested a lot of guys, and it still did not make any impact on Portland. I mean, it's just they have that dynamic backcourt with C.J. McCollum and Damian Lillard, but really after that, there's not much there to really be happy about, and it's making a very, very big impact on the team. There's just not enough around them. If Kevin Durant plays or even doesn't play in Game 3, I'd probably hold him out. I mean, definitely you don't have to get him ready to face the Portland Trail Blazers, or I'd maybe monitor his minutes a little bit. I would imagine the Warriors would be fine without him. They were fine in Game 2. Obviously, going back to Portland, they have the home court advantage right now. That's going to be a really good thing for them to lean on, but I still think the Warriors should be able to sweep the Portland Trail Blazers and roll right by them. Kevin Durant's probably going to play with that calf injury, as I mentioned, but even if he doesn't or only plays a handful of minutes, I think the Golden State Warriors will be just fine on Saturday as they take on the Blazers. I think they will sweep them in this series. Looking at Sunday, we have Game 4 of Cleveland and Indiana. Can Indiana keep it alive? They're facing a sweep right now. We're going to have Game 4 between the Rockets and Thunder. Could that potentially be a 2-2 matchup after this game? We'll have to see. The Bulls and Celtics, if the Bulls win tonight, this could be the clincher for them right there. And then we'll have Game 4 between the Jazz and the Clippers. So either 3-1 or 2-2 could be a very, very important game, Game 4 here in Salt Lake City on Sunday. We're going to take our final break here on the show. After the break, we have a lot of news. The potential trade between the Celtics and the Knicks involving Carmelo Anthony is maybe seeming more and more likely now. We'll have to wait and see. The Brooklyn Nets owner, Mikhail Prokhorov, is selling shares of his team, thank God. And Jalen Brunson from Villanova deciding to stay for his junior season in college. All that news upcoming here at the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
So Brooklyn Nets majority owner Mikhail Prokhorov is deciding to sell a 49% stake in the Brooklyn Nets. The Russian billionaire did have a minority ownership in 2010. Well, actually, he owned 80% of it, moved him to Brooklyn in 2012, and now he's full owner in 2015, but he's selling 49%, so he's still a majority owner at 51%, but he is giving up a lot of the team, and honestly, thank God. I mean, no disrespect, but he has been terrible for the Nets organization. Tried to make that big trade to bring in Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, gave up multiple unprotected first-round picks. Remember, the Celtics have their first-round pick unprotected this year and next year. The Nets finished with a league worst 20 wins this season, and it's their third consecutive season finishing under 500. They're just simply a bad team, and it's all come under the ownership of Prokhorov. So the fact that he's moving on and giving up some stakes in this ball club is honestly a good thing, because he's only been bad for the Nets organization, whether they're in New Jersey or now in Brooklyn. It has been very, very bad for the Nets under Mikhail Prokhorov. So still majority owner, but if you can bring in some guys who maybe know what they're doing, ownership that does not want to run the team in particular, because I feel like that's where things get really, really tough and where you see bad things happen. When owners try to become general managers, whether it's football, basketball, baseball, you got to bring guys in there that know what they're doing. Owners should not be running organizations. You don't ever see the owner of the Spurs doing anything. You have R.C. Buford, who's the GM, and Popovich doing everything. Robert Kraft does not run the New England Patriots. Bill Belichick does. Danny Ainge runs the Celtics. You got to bring guys in that can run the team. When owners try to run the team, things don't work out. Vivek Ranadive, since buying the Kings, has tried to run the team. Yeah, there's people that are in general management spots, but he has a huge impact on what happens. It hasn't worked out in Sacramento. These things don't work out. So the fact that he's still the majority owner, but maybe going to give up a lot of his shares in the team and maybe have some more influences on bringing in different guys and players and positions and everything, it'll potentially be better for the Brooklyn Nets. I think that's actually a good thing. In college basketball, Jalen Brunson from Villanova, the guard, is going to return for his junior season. Last year, he averaged about 15 points and 4 assists per game, and he's going to have a big part on the team next year, seeing as how they did lose Josh Hart. He's going to have to be relied on more, Jalen Brunson, for this upcoming season for Villanova. Remember, national champion 2 years ago. Last year, well, I guess you say this year, they lost to number 8 Wisconsin in the second round of the NCAA tournament. At one time, he was a McDonald's All-American. The fact that he's returning back to school, I think, is a good sign. Villanova usually does this with a lot of their players, graduates a lot of them. So we'll see if Brunson decides to even stay there for a fourth year after next season. But of course, we'll have to wait and see. A couple more interesting news is that the Magic are reportedly interested in the Cavs general manager David Griffin to fill that void. Of course, they were looking at maybe Grant Hill since firing their GM last week. So potentially that could be interesting to see if they maybe have some thoughts with David Griffin. Of course, David Griffin has not really got along with LeBron James recently in recent times, but who knows? Maybe if they can win another title, things will change a little bit, but we'll have to wait and see. Of course, I think money will determine a lot of things as well. And this story coming up, according to Mark Berman of the New York Post, a source indicated that the Celtics coaching staff signed on about acquiring Carmelo at the trade deadline, and now there's reportedly, since the Celtics are really struggling in this first round matchup against the Chicago Bulls, that a potential offseason trade between the Knicks and Celtics regarding Carmelo Anthony could be a more attractive option. Of course, Phil Jackson has come out and said that he feels like he and Melo would be better off somewhere else. And, I mean, given that he said that out in front of the media, just in front of everybody, is not a good sign at all. And I find it really hard to believe that he's going to be in New York next season. Carmelo Anthony does have a no-trade clause. Would he waive that to go to Boston? I would say yeah. I mean, the Boston Celtics are the number 1 seed in the East right now, although they are on the brink of maybe being eliminated from the playoffs. We'll see what happens with Rajon Rondo, how that injury impacts the Chicago Bulls. But as far as a trade from the Knicks side, of course you're going to want to make this move. You're getting rid of that monster contract Carmelo Anthony has. And you remember, the Celtics do have all those draft picks from the Brooklyn Nets. So they're going to be getting a lot of picks back for Carmelo Anthony. You have to mention at least a number one this year. Potentially next year, I'm sure there has to be a lot more involved. Some pieces. I mean, the Knicks might want to maybe move on and acquire Jay Crowder from Boston. We'll have to wait and see. But from a Boston Celtics perspective, I would not make this trade at all. Carmelo Anthony is definitely not good for your locker room and your team. He's just not a winner. He just can't win. He's only had one conference finals appearance in his entire career. That's the farthest he's ever gone. That was with Denver. So I would not make this move. You could potentially maybe try to lure back Jimmy Butler from Chicago. Maybe try to move on and get Paul George, depending on if he wants to sign a long-term deal. He wants to go to LA, but maybe if he goes to Boston, a great team, he might be more intrigued to sign a long-term deal there. I would definitely look at those two options before I look at the option of Carmelo Anthony. But, I mean, Danny Ainge is not a dumb guy. He's a smart guy. So just the fact that you might even want to be looking is something you might want to entertain. You know, I think that's definitely an okay thing. So to talk about it, okay. If it's going to happen, honestly, I say no. And from a Boston perspective, I would not take it. From a Knicks perspective, of course you're going to want to take it because the president, Phil Jackson, and the team with Carmelo Anthony are just not in a good spot right now, and they're not happy with each other. So you really have to look elsewhere and try and move them on. But Carmelo Anthony has the final say. He has that no-trade clause. He can void or accept whatever he wants. So we'll see what happens, but just the report coming out is really interesting. We'll see if there's any truth to it. But anyways, that's going to be it for the show. My name is Ben Brown. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We're going to be taking a break for the weekend. Pauline and myself will be back in the studio on Monday, recapping this weekend of postseason in the NBA and all those storylines in basketball here at the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Have a good day, have a good weekend, and we will see you on Monday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.